Good evening, you're watching The Last Word. A chilling ordeal unfolded on board flight 6E2142, an IndiGo airliner from Delhi to Srinagar on the 21st of May, 2 days back. Denied airspace deviations, pilots battled a life-threatening storm, facing intense hail, severe turbulence and critical system failures. With the autopilot disabled, they manually landed the A321 after a harrowing experience. The aviation watchdog is now probing the pilot's decision to confront the storm. We'll be looking at just what has emerged by way of new information on this flight. You can see an image of that aircraft after it landed, its nose cone entirely smashed. Also coming up on the program, the well-known defense expert John Spencer on the success of Indian-made weapon systems during Operation Synindor. But first, the situation on flight 6E2142 from Delhi to Srinagar on the 21st of May, this Wednesday, was far more serious than previously detailed. It now seems clear that the pilots were fighting a potentially life-threatening situation. After being denied permission by Pakistan Air Traffic Control in Lahore to enter their airspace to avoid an intense storm front over Pathankot, the crew ended up combating an increasingly desperate situation after deciding to penetrate the weather in front. Earlier, they had also requested the Northern Control of the Indian Air Force for permission to deviate left towards the border, but were informed by the IAF of the Pakistan airspace ban. They were reminded of it. And this, of course, has been there for some time following tensions between India and Pakistan. Now, questions will be asked on whether the pilots made the right decision to pierce the storm front, whether they should have come back instead. Well, the aircraft did fly into an intense hailstorm. It did encounter severe turbulence. What we now know is that there were multiple in-cockpit alerts that went off. There were alerts for an angle of attack fault, an alternate law protection was lost, and the backup speed scale became unreliable. In other words, a host of technical factors and huge safety concerns perhaps at this stage. On the flight, there were violent updrafts and downdrafts which passengers felt. The autopilot system tripped, which resulted in huge variations in airspeed. Amidst the severe turbulence, the Airbus A321 descended rapidly at 8,500 feet per minute at one stage, far exceeding the typical 1,500 to 3,000 feet per minute for a standard approach. With the autopilot system non-operational, the pilots manually flew the jetliner into Srinagar, declaring an emergency and making a safe landing. While the aviation regulator will probe whether the pilots should have returned instead of trying to fly through this weather, it's important to reflect on the seriousness of the situation in the cockpit and how the pilots battled through what now appears to be an incredibly harrowing situation. Well, joining us now, Captain Kishore Chinta, the Chief Pilot of Sirius India Airlines Private Limited. Thanks very much, Captain Chinta. We'll get into whether or not the pilots should have actually gone through that in a moment. But the fact is that they did go through it. How severe were these in-flight alerts, in-cockpit alerts, which were sounded, the fact that airspeed sensors had been degraded, the fact that there were huge updrafts and downdrafts as well? How serious an emergency was this for this flight once it got in to that storm front?
Good evening, Vishnu. Thank you for having me on NDTV. The seriousness is not something which the pilots could not have handled, or something which is not something they train for on a regular basis. So updrafts and downdrafts are pretty much normal in any turbulent air conditions when you enter a cumulonimbus cloud like they did. But prima facie, as it appears, it was a case of a difference between the devil and the deep blue sea, where they had the international border on the left side, where a threat of surface-to-air missiles from the Pakistani side. And on the right side was climbing terrain, where the mountains are close by, and there was a squall line all along that axis that they could not have turned right. Turning right would have meant even worse weather. So it was a difficult decision for the pilots per se. It's easy for us to sit here in a cozy environment and ask questions on what best the pilots could have done. But I'm sure with the sum of all the experience and the training they had, they chose the best way out at that particular time. And they seem to have done a fabulous job of handling the flight conditions at that point of time and landing the aircraft safely.
Captain Amit Singh also joins us at this stage. Captain Singh, we'll get into whether or not it was the right thing for the pilots to actually go through that storm front. But give us a sense of how severe the emergency was, given what we've heard from the regulator when they were actually going through it.
Well, if we have to believe what we are reading, it was a near disaster. Air France 447, which crashed into the sea, was descending at the rate of 10,000 feet per minute. This aircraft, at least on flight radar, I've seen more than 5,500 feet per minute rate of descent and then climb more than 3,000 feet. So the passengers and the crew would have felt high G-force. So G-force is going up and down. So the change in G would be pretty severe for the aircraft if it exceeds the operating limits. And at that height, when you are having low temperatures, hail hitting the aircraft, so visually there would be lightning, and the pitot, which means the probes which sense the speed, would have frozen momentarily maybe, or for a longer time. So all hell would have broken loose inside. Cockpit indications would have gone way out of the limits. Warning bells would be sounding if we have to believe what is written. Stall warning. Stall warning is not what a pilot wants to hear, which means the aircraft has ceased to fly any more longer. The wings are not generating any lift, so aircraft is going to come down. Which way? That depends. So the pilots are trained for high altitude jet upset recovery because it is the biggest threat now for aviation. But given this situation, it was more complicated because of the constraints around, and they are not able to maneuver. If you have the room to maneuver, you can avoid or reduce the risk. But here, everything is adding up, contributing. Another biggest issue would be the hail hitting the engines. In 1988, when 737 came down with both engines flamed out, they landed on a grassy patch. Because of water ingestion and hail, they entered a cloud. So that is a big concern. Nowadays, ice crystals and hail are damaging the fan blades, and there could be a flame out, momentary flame out, if passengers were saying that the electricity or the lighting was going on and off. There could be disturbance with the electrical, which is basically powered by the engines, the generators. So a lot would have been happening, and it all depends on how the investigation is carried out so that we get something to learn from it, not just paper value. The last accident which happened in Jamshedpur with SpiceJet, one person died, unfortunately. The accident report came after 3 years, and that too, it has been petered down. And then not much learning from it. So I'm sure the pilots would need a lot of help psychologically also, because having gone through such an ordeal, if it is true what we are reading. I'm not sure
true.
because there's no official word out.
This is a DGCA report. It's a press release by the Directorate General of Civil Aviation on the basis of which we are reporting all of this. Captain Chinta, let's just look at some of the other things which went on in the cockpit. Multiple in-cockpit alerts for an angle of attack fault, and alternate law protection was lost. The backup speed scale became unreliable. There were violent updrafts and downdrafts. The autopilot tripped, right? The aircraft switched to alternate law. They were flying with this degraded flight control mode. In many senses, this was similar to AF447, the A330, which went down off the coast of Brazil several years back. It does appear that, the data they received in the cockpit in terms of airspeed may have been inaccurate. We don't want to, get into why that happened. We don't know so far, but it could be, given the conditions, the pitot tubes may have been impacted. But when you read all of this, and all of this comes off that press release of the DGCA, it appears to be an incredibly challenging experience. So you were telling me earlier on that, pilots are trained to deal with all of this. But then, things seem to be escalating here pretty fast. Would you like to reflect on that?
Yes, Vishnu. The fact that this was a Airbus 321 Neo equipped with the LEAP engines, we should be amazed that the engines didn't fail and the performance was great. And the aircraft was at flight level 360 for the Airbus 320. The ceiling is 400. So apparently, obviously, it was in very thin air. The turbulence speed would be about 0.6 mark at those altitudes. There's a range. So at higher levels, the safe speed margin is much lower due to what we pilots call as coffin corner. So the pilot couldn't have descended. He couldn't have outclimbed. The auto thrust too, in case of excessive speed variation, like in this case, would have had to be disconnected, and the pilots would have been operating the powers manually. And to go over at these levels of turbulence, there's obviously been severe turbulence, like Captain Ahmed said. On the flight radar, it appears to be 5,600 feet of rate of descent and 3,600 feet of rate of climb. That's a combined variation of the vertical of about close to 11,000 feet between the axis of up and down. So
the DGCA says during this period, the aircraft rate of descent reached 8,000 feet per minute. Okay, that's their official statement. But carry on.
Yes, yeah. That's probably from the flight data recorder.
Right.
But we just going over what the flight radar data, which is available and has open source. So at these levels, as such, negotiating weather is very tricky, and the crew's mind would be to tackle this in every possible way with inaccurate airspeed, stall warning, because the stall margin reduces at these altitudes, which Captain Amit has already pointed out. It's probably as close to the worst case jet upset recovery, which in real life scenario, which the pilots would have handled. So it's pure providence that with inaccurate air data available in terms of airspeed, altitude, and everything, they would have relied. It was pretty late in the evening, so in all probability would have been dark all over. So no visual references for attitude. So whatever they did would probably been a very thin margin from going down to making it a good recovery from where they were.
Yeah. Captain Amit Singh, this brings me on to the other question of the fact that the pilots chose to press on instead of perhaps holding in a particular position, assessing what the weather was, particularly since there's a notice to airmen about Pakistan. Everybody knows about it. Indian Airlines aren't allowed to fly over there. Some would suggest that it was strange that the pilot chose instead to get in touch with air traffic control in Lahore, only to be told that, no, I'm sorry, you cannot fly over Pakistani airspace, right? And in a situation like that, why he didn't turn around and return to Delhi? Is this not something, shouldn't safety come first? Do you believe that these questions need to be asked?
Well, a lot of questions need to be asked because this would be considered an accident as per the definition. So in an accident, we look at the organization as well. In the first place, when the flight was planned, that is the pre-flight planning or dispatch stage, when there was adequate information that there's a huge cell which spans across the flight path, and this is the time of the year when you have rapid growing violent thunderstorms, pre-monsoon times. So it is not that people are not aware at dispatch. So why was the route not altered to the more eastern route where the rest of the traffic was flying or coming out of Srinagar? So that is the first question, the planning stage, because more work on ground means less work in air. So why put it on the pilot to do everything? As it is, fatigue is also a bigger factor. Pressinitis is a problem with the pilots that has to be handled in multiple ways. So the radar is able to detect up to 160 nautical miles, more than 300 kilometers, pretty accurately, these modern radars. With color coding, they can show red and magenta of threats as well. So it is not that adequate warning wasn't there, but the cells move very fast. These thunderstorm cells build very fast and move across very fast, closing in. So when you are operating in the air, dimensionally, you're not able to predict who's going to reach first. So maybe they had some indication that they would be able to cross that place by the time the thunderstorm reaches. So that could have been, that needs to be studied, investigated. Moreover, the problem is that if you declare Mayday, then no agency, whether war or anything, will be able to deny you any facility. So that is the international norm. If you announce Mayday, which means the aircraft is in distress, needs immediate assistance, then they have to open up your airspace, open up, be it a defense airfield or whatever. It has to be done. So that is the international norm which Pakistan cannot refuse. Nobody can refuse. Even now, if the flights are coming in from Middle East towards Bombay, if you have an in-flight emergency, then if you have smoke inside, you have to put the aircraft down as soon as possible. If Karachi is the closest port, you have to go there. You don't have to think that there is a war on or not.
All right, look, gentlemen, we leave it over
there.
there. I'm running short on time, but I think on the basis of what the Directorate General of Civil Aviation has indicated, this was a fairly close call on this particular flight. Thank you very much for being with us. Well, several MPs from across party lines have been traveling all over the world trying to explain to countries why India's policy on terrorism is what it is, how Pakistan is an epicenter of terrorism. It's not just these opposition MPs. The foreign minister has been traveling extensively, and today India received an incredible amount of support from Germany. Let's listen in.
India security and global security. We all were appalled by the brutal terrorist attack on India on the 22nd of April. We condemned this attack on civilians in the strongest terms. Our deepest sympathy goes out to all victims and their families. After military attacks on both sides, and India, of course, has every right to defend itself against terrorism, the fact that now a truce is in place is something we appreciate very much. What is important now is that this truce remains stable, that dialogue can happen in order to find bilateral solutions.
The success of Made in India systems during Operation Synindor has been very much a highlight of India's operations against Pakistan. And joining us now to tell us his thoughts about some of the weapon systems and the strategy that India deployed in Op Synindor in the fight against Pakistan, John Spencer. He's among the world's foremost defense analysts. Thanks very much, John, for being with us. You know, when I was on the line of control just a couple of days back, the key message which I was told by Indian soldiers was that when you've got any number of incoming drones, it's not always possible to fire off surface-to-air missiles, which is why older technology also has an important role to play when it comes to taking on drones. How is this a pragmatic way of dealing with the threat which we saw emerge from Pakistan in the last couple of weeks?
I mean, it's very pragmatic, and I study war around the world, and there's so many aspects of this that are very revealing and surprising. I mean, war is always the ultimate test, and even watching Indian generals talk about rehearsing a drone swarm attack days before Pakistan actually launched it, and all the different components. You know, I'm an infantryman by trade, but understanding all the different components of radar and all the electronic warfare systems and active protection, but also the ability to lethally hit an incoming drone or missile. I know it's very sophisticated, but to see made in India products being incorporated and to be so effective, and I think what we've seen in Operation Synindor was, not all talk, it was all action, and the effectiveness of all these systems combined together in a layered defense, because I know it's not one magic thing, although we can talk about the BrahMos missile and other things, but it's not one magic device. This is a few years, India turning the military industrial base around and implementing different systems in a very effective, cost-effective as well system that would show to be effective against Chinese and other types of products.
No, I think that's an interesting point because there's been a fair amount of criticism of the indigenous or the Indian defense sector that they've been very slow, they've been behind the curve, there have been delays in government orders, and that may all be true, but it does appear that there's been a great deal of progress which has been made. So India's been typically one of the largest importers of weaponry in the world, but based on what you are seeing, there's been a sense, would you agree, of the indigenous capacity to build weaponry really come to the front and showcase that prowess against Pakistan, right?
100%. And I also know, understanding where it started in 2014 at a 14% make in India and advancing that all the way up to 65%. So it's not just making amazing products, but it's doing it at scale as well. Because having been to India, having been to many locations, I know it's a very, very big country, and be able to protect the line of defense, protect the Golden Temple and places like that, you're talking about a massive area where you need the ability to scale military industrial equipment. And that was shown again to be effective, and what India decided before this has been paid off. And for a lot of militaries, imagining the future of warfare is really hard for them and what systems to invest in and everything. It appears, and I'm actually will be on the ground next month to learn more, but it appears that India made many decisions that basically proved to be true and the right decisions.
There's also been very high tech which has also been used. I asked this because I began by speaking about low-cost solutions, which makes sense in this kind of fight anywhere. But at the end of the day, it was the really high, the relatively high cost and high tech solutions that, in a way, pushed Pakistan to come to the ceasefire table. I'm talking specifically about the attacks on air bases. So, you were talking about the BrahMos missile. There are other systems as well, a few of them Israeli systems. But all of those high-tech solutions ultimately brought Pakistan to the ceasefire table, right?
Absolutely. I mean, just a demonstration of the air power and all the jets that were in the sky with beyond visual range, but also what the BrahMos at Mach 3 is able to do, and no defense against all of these systems. And again, I know that in the BrahMos it was very impressive and showed to be effective against even advanced air defense systems. But I know it was a combination of air detection, electronic warfare, radar on the Indian fighter jets that makes all of that possible. But yes, these high tech. Although again, I travel the world, so I know that all warfare is a combination of very effective new technology, but also the old technology being maintained and utilized in those ground systems. You need it all, and India just demonstrated how you combine new, very advanced, made in India products with other products that are older but still showing effective, to include even ground-based radar.
How do you assess the performance of Chinese weapon systems in this brief war? I mean, if I use that word, most people don't, but it's limited. But how would you assess, Chinese weapon systems?
Yeah, I mean, talk is talk. Satellite imagery is what it is. So I view that Chinese systems as ineffective against Indian systems. I'm not saying they're not effective against a range of capabilities, but India demonstrated that even when you have advanced Chinese systems, they are able to hit what they want when they want. And I'll stand by that, because India hit all 11 sites that they wanted to hit and send a message, not overwhelming destruction, but send a message that they could penetrate those Chinese systems. And it's a word of caution too, because I'm sure the Chinese and the Pakistanis will get together and try to see how they were penetrated, and their systems weren't as superior as they had sold Pakistan that they were. So they'll make adjustments. So this isn't over in having that overwhelming military superiority, we call it overmatch, that India has over these Chinese systems, but clear demonstration of the ability to by stuff blowing up on satellite imagery.
Let's talk a little bit about drones deployed by India. Many of these are made in India drones. Even the Harop drone, which is an Israeli design, is actually made in India, the Sky Striker as well. in terms of the operations which you saw, how important were these sophisticated drones? Because drones, as you know, come in all shapes and sizes and capabilities. But in terms of suicide munitions, which is what the Harop and the Sky Striker are, what role did they play?
Yeah, they played a big role in the, and again, having studied the Harop in the second battle, Nagorno-Karabakh war, it's a very effective loitering munition that can stay up for a long amount of time, reduces your risk on fighter jets and fighter pilots, but also can play in an integrated role of an attack like this, where they target those air defense systems because they are cheaper, but very advanced, can go over great distances and stay up for a long time. So both the Striker and the Harop played a role in this integrated attack, because you have to be able to take out the radar systems and the capabilities that would stop you from your next, but they saved Indian lives. They're cost effective and they're really hard to defeat. But again, India showed that they could defeat the Turkish drones and other systems that are similar, but not in an integrated fashion, the way that India integrated them.
What I found interesting, and this is a story I did, I think 3 days back, is that in as much as we talk about, all of the drones which went in and the missiles which went in, I was in a frontline position on the line of control in the Akhnur sector, talking with soldiers on tanks. And India fought with tanks as well. They didn't cross the international border or the line of control, but they went right up to the line and they used that as well. How would you reflect on the fact that, when the Indian attack took place, it involved everything. The Navy had a role, perhaps not offensive, but certainly defensive. Army tanks were firing on terrorist ingress routes as well, and then drones and missiles, which we've spoken about. How was it a complete, armed forces effort? It wasn't restricted in that sense.
Right, exactly. And I hope that's the message that even India takes, that, of course, the Air Force demonstrated a superior capability, but both in both the defense with the ground-based systems, everything from tanks to artillery to the soldiers manning the ground-based radar, that this is India is a joint military with joint capabilities, and you couldn't have pulled off a 4-day decisive victory like this without all of those working simultaneously and in harmony, which is the ultimate kind of PhD level of warfare, is when you can fight joint warfare and you combine them all to be this effective, and put soldiers at risk, but brave soldiers with the capabilities integrated across a joint force. And that's why that pressure with all the commanders from the ground, the air, and the naval was an important one, showing how each one integrated with each other to provide a vital component, where it wouldn't have worked if you didn't have each one doing their part, but also at scale and with effectiveness.
A final question to you. It's been several years now that India and the United States have worked together, not just at the strategic level, but also at the tactical level. I'm talking about military exercises. You've been an infantryman yourself. It's been a bit of a crawl, walk, run sort of evolution of that military association through joint exercises. How does America assess India as a potential war-fighting partner?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm going to continue to look at it. I mean, I was on the ground in 2019 with India's research centers, India's military, walking the attacks in Mumbai, learning from India, and so that we could take the lessons. I know the relationship is strong, and as you said, it has gone up and down. With this shift, as I wrote in my article, I think there's a lot of things that India demonstrated from the strategic down to the tactical that could improve the U.S. military relationships and the way we do things. I think the relationship is strong, but hopefully this is a demonstration that it improves as we look into how did India do this, and those relationships increase, because this is this no nuclear blackmail, this fight against terrorism, that's a global concern, and that's why I want to learn more, and I'll be on the ground, because I think that there's a lot that the U.S. military and the U.S. government can learn from this event. Controlled response to terrorism and putting a red line saying no more will we allow this proxy low intensity terrorism against a state actor.
All right, thanks very much, John. Great speaking to you, and great to hear your thoughts on how this conflict went. Thank you very much indeed.